"I thought you only shuffled papers," my mother whispered. Her eye roll was a calculated performance for the news cameras. Across the room, the judge's pen froze, his eyes fixed on me with a flicker of recognition for a name he hadn't heard in years. The entire courtroom went silent when I placed the amber envelope on the table. Its official seal had been retired 8 years ago, yet there it was, unbroken. Ria Kincaid stepped into the Harborview City Courthouse. The chilled recycled air was a familiar and unwelcome embrace in a place built of marble and hushed consequences, where the weight of judgment settled like fine dust on every polished surface. She carried a single slim briefcase, its leather worn smooth in the exact shape of her hand. Her stride was even, her posture a straight line of composure, learned over years of dissecting fossils for the North Shore Bureau of Public Integrity. Her parents, Evelyn and Charles Kincaid, were already seated in the plaintiff's row. They sat shoulder to shoulder, a picture of curated sorrow. Evelyn, in a dove-grey suit, clutched a handkerchief. Charles, his jaw set in a mask of patrician grievance, rested a hand protectively on her arm. Their synergy was flawless, a pose perfected for the cameras that flashed intermittently from the gallery. They looked less like parents suing their only child and more like the heartbroken benefactors on the cover of a charity gala brochure. When their eyes met Ria's, there was no flicker of familial connection, only a coordinated, dismissive coldness. It was a look she knew well, the one reserved for a business deal that had soured. At the bench, Judge Alaric Boone was making a note, his fountain pen scratching softly in the quiet room. As the clerk announced the case, he looked up, his gaze sweeping over the plaintiffs, their counsel, and then landing on Ria. He stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper for a single suspended moment. A barely perceptible shift occurred in his expression, a subtle widening of the eyes that was not for the public, but for a memory. It was the quiet recognition of a man seeing the ghost of a shared mentor standing before him. In that silent beat, Ria knew the judge understood that the name Kincaid was merely a technicality. The name that truly mattered in this room was Price. The local media, crammed into the back rows, was already spinning its narrative. The headlines that morning had been explosive, a symphony of insinuation. Aries' daughter in court battle for mentor's fortune, read one. Family alleges undue influence as Dean Malcolm Price's final will is contested, read another. They painted her as a predator, a cold-hearted interloper, who had preyed on a lonely old man. Ria ignored the clicking shutters and the hungry eyes. She felt them like a physical pressure, but she did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she heard Dean Price's voice as clear as if he was standing beside her, his tone dry and resonant with conviction. Never trade integrity for comfort. Ria, comfort is a sedative. Integrity is a spine. He had said it to her a decade ago, sitting in his dusty, book-lined office at Lockmere Law, the scent of old paper and lemon tea in the air. The words had become her compass. Her parents' lawyer, Gideon Rusk, rose to address the court. He was a man who wore his ambition like a well-tailored suit, expensive and a little too tight in the shoulders. His smile was a bright, predatory thing. Ria knew him, not personally, but by reputation. More importantly, she knew Price's opinion of him. Rusk was the brilliant associate the dean had personally removed from a landmark professional ethics project, citing a fundamental lack of moral cartilage. Rusk had never forgiven the slight. Now, seeing him stand there championing her parents' cause, Ria understood. His presence crystallized the entire affair. This wasn't a family dispute over an inheritance. It was not about money, not really. It was about legacy. It was Rusk's chance for posthumous revenge against the man who had publicly branded him as unethical. It was her parents' attempt to claw back a daughter who had chosen a different code, to absorb a legacy they felt entitled to by proximity and name alone. And for Ria, it was the final binding clause of an unspoken contract, a promise made to a dying mentor, to protect the one thing he valued above all else. This courtroom was not just a legal venue, it was the proving ground for that promise. The stage was set with clinical precision by Gideon Rusk. He painted a picture of Dean Malcolm Price in his final months, as a man adrift in a fog of cognitive decline, a brilliant mind tragically dimmed. The centerpiece of his argument was Price's will, which did not, as the media had sensationalized, bequeath a personal fortune to Rhea. Instead, it appointed her the sole academic custodian of the Price Integrity Fund, a meticulously structured trust of $2.3 million earmarked exclusively for funding nonpartisan research and scholarships in the field of legal ethics. It was a legacy of principle, not a winning lottery ticket. Her parents, through Rusk, claimed this was the ultimate proof of Price's clouded judgment. Their petition was to restore the family's custodial heritage by dissolving Rhea's guardianship and transferring the funds into a newly created Coincidental family trust, which they would benevolently oversee. It was a thinly veiled corporate takeover of a dead man's principles. Then came the cornerstone of their case. Rusk, with the somber gravity of a surgeon delivering a grim diagnosis, submitted to the court a certificate of diminished capacity. It was dated 6 weeks before Price's death. The document bore the official-looking seal of St. Aurelian Hospital, a private facility that had served the city's elite for a century. Rusk presented it as the tragic final word on the dean's state of mind. Rhea accepted the copy from the clerk, her expression unreadable. She felt the weight of the cameras on her back, waiting for a crack in her composure. She gave them nothing. Back in the temporary office she'd rented, a sterile, anonymous room with a desk and a coffee machine, she laid the certificate under the bright, unforgiving light of a desk lamp. The document was an artifice, and to her trained eye, a clumsy one. The first flaw was the hospital itself. St. Aurelian had been shuttered in 2017, its assets liquidated, its records archived or destroyed. A certificate issued years after its closure was not just improbable, it was impossible. She examined the seal. The ink was a vibrant royal blue, but it lacked the specific, slightly feathered bleed characteristic of the glycerin-based pads St. Aurelian had used. Post-2015, most institutions had switched to faster-drying, alcohol-based inks to prevent smudging. This looked like it came from a modern, commercially available ink pad. Then she looked at the signature attesting to the diagnosis, Dr. Alistair Finch, attending physician. A quick search on her laptop confirmed her suspicion. Dr. Finch had been a respected neurologist, but he had tragically drowned in a boating accident in the summer of 2016. A dead man had apparently signed a medical certificate from a defunct hospital. The next morning, the story exploded. The certificate was leaked, and the narrative Rusk had carefully constructed took root. News blogs and local television ran segments with titles like The Coincidental Deception and Daughter's Cold Betrayal. She was painted as a manipulative schemer who had isolated an ailing mentor from his true friends, the Coincidentals. The narrative was simple, emotional, and utterly effective. The professional blow landed swiftly. A call from her director at the North Shore Bureau of Public Integrity was polite but firm. She was being placed on indefinite administrative leave. "It's a conflict of interest, Rhea. You understand," he'd said. "The Bureau can't have one of its lead investigators embroiled in a public ethics scandal." She understood perfectly. She was isolated, her credibility publicly shredded, and her resources officially cut off. She was on her own. Her first call was to Mara Delaney. Delaney was a private investigator who existed in the spaces where public records and digital shadows overlapped. She was a legend in certain circles, a woman who could find a receipt for a coffee paid for in cash 10 years ago. "Mara, it's Rhea. I've seen the news." Delaney's voice was like gravel and cigarette smoke. "Figured you'd call. What do you need? A ghost?" Rhea said, Her voice low and even, St. Aurelian Hospital, specifically. It's asset liquidation. I need to know who bought the old administrative supplies, stamps, seals, letterhead. Start with public auction manifests. I'm sending you a file, Delaney replied. Consider it done, Delaney said, and the line went dead. While Delaney hunted in the archives, her parents took to the airwaves. They gave a tearful exclusive interview to a local news anchor known for her sympathetic, soft focus segments. Evelyn, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, spoke of her deep, abiding friendship with Malcolm Price. Charles, his voice thick with contrived emotion, spoke of their family's shock and pain. This isn't about money, he insisted, his hand clasping his wife's. It's about the truth. It's about protecting our dear friend's legacy from confusion. We just want what Malcolm would have wanted. Rhea watched the performance on her laptop, a bitter taste in her mouth. She recognized the words. They were the same ones her father used when justifying a hostile business merger. 2 days later, Delaney called back. Got it, she said. A liquidation company in a warehouse district handled the St. Aurelian sell-off. Most of it was shredded or sold for scrap, but a lot of the old office equipment, what they called memorabilia, was sold in bulk lots. I found an email chain from an LLC I've never heard of, inquiring about purchasing vintage office supplies, specifically embossed seals. Who owns the LLC? Rhea asked, her pen poised over a notepad. It's a shell corp, but the inquiry email was forwarded for approval to an internal address. The address belonged to Gideon Rusk's junior paralegal. It was the crack she needed. She drafted a motion immediately, appending Delaney's evidence, and filed for a limited discovery order to examine Rusk's firm's financial records related to the purchase. Given the clear evidence of Rusk's direct interest in obtaining an old hospital seal, Judge Boone granted it. The order was a small victory, but it shifted the ground beneath the case. In his chambers, Boone, a man who valued process above all else, addressed both legal teams. His face was impassive, his tone clipped. He was not interested in the media circus or the public melodrama. The court will not be swayed by television interviews or leaked documents, he stated, his eyes briefly flicking toward Rusk. I am giving both sides 10 days to prepare and submit your complete evidentiary briefs. After that, we will proceed. I expect facts, not fiction. As Rhea left the courthouse that afternoon, she was ambushed by a scrum of reporters, microphones and cameras thrust in her face. Ms. Kincaid, what's your response to your parents' heartfelt plea? Will you be dropping the case? Is it true you've been suspended from your job? She stopped. The cacophony died down as they waited for the soundbite. Rhea looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. My silence is my statement, she said, her voice clear and cold. Then she turned and walked away, leaving them with nothing but the echo of her words. The 10-day deadline imposed by Judge Boone hung over Rhea like a guillotine. Her suspension from the bureau meant she was cut off from her usual resources, locked out of the databases and forensic tools she relied on. She was operating from a rented room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and weak coffee. Her only asset was the private line to Mara Delaney and a mind trained to see patterns in chaos. The media storm raged outside, painting her as a sociopath. She ignored it, focusing on the fraudulent document, the name of the dead doctor, the ink that was too bright. Her isolation was a familiar weight. It drew her back past the noise of the present to a crowded lecture hall at Lockmere Law over a decade ago. She had been a scholarship student, perpetually outside the polished circles of legacy names. Malcolm Price was the keynote speaker at an ethics seminar. He was a titan, but he spoke with a quiet, incisive clarity that cut through the academic posturing. During the Q&A, a student asked him if a tough prosecutor was inherently a good one. Price had paused, his gaze sweeping the room, and then asked a question of his own. We are all taught to pursue justice. But what? He asked the auditorium. Does justice become hollow when it is divorced from kindness? The room was silent. Students shifted, glancing at their professors, trying to divine the correct answer. Ria, sitting in the back row, hadn't raised her hand. She simply spoke into the quiet, an empty punishment. Price's eyes found her instantly. He held her gaze, and for the first time, Ria felt truly seen. He didn't praise her. He just nodded, a small, sharp acknowledgement, and moved on. But after, he found her by the coffee urn and asked her name. That meeting evolved into a mentorship. It became quiet weekends at his coastal home in Mistral Inlet, a place that smelled of salt air, old books, and the roses he meticulously cultivated. Their work was not the stuff of salacious undue influence. It was Ria buried in case law, checking footnotes for his latest law review article. It was her arguing with him over a finer point of judicial overreach. Her hand stained with the same insecticide powder she used to dust his rose bushes. He taught her the architecture of integrity. He'd once been called in to consult for a massive corporate legal department facing a scandal. Price uncovered a dirty political donation, a bribe disguised as philanthropy. But he didn't go to the press. He presented his findings to the board, silently forcing them to self-report. The company was saved. The guilty parties were fired, and the donation was clawed back. Sometimes, Ria, he told her, pruning a dead branch. The truth is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. You don't have to be the loudest person to be the most heard. You just have to be the most precise. It was a lesson she had never learned at home, from Evelyn and Charles Kincaid. Reputation was the only currency. Ethics were negotiable. Appearances were ironclad. They saw her weekends with Price not as an education, but as a networking failure. Why are you wasting your time with that dusty old man? Her mother had asked once, when you could be at the club benefit with the Barclay Smiths. To them, Ria was a willful disappointment, a discordant note in their carefully composed symphony of social standing, when she chose a low-paying job at the Bureau of Public Integrity over a lucrative partnership at a corporate firm. They had all but written her off. Price, conversely, had seen it as a validation. He was the one who understood her refusal to cut corners. He was also the one who had, years ago, sealed Gideon Rusk's fate. Rusk, then a rising star, had sought Price's endorsement for a judicial appointment. Price had refused. Ria had been in his office when he'd taken the call. I will not, Gideon. Price's voice was cold steel. Sign a letter of recommendation for a man who views the law not as a shield, but as a crowbar. The denial had torpedoed Rusk's ambitions. Now, in this courtroom, the crowbar was swinging back at Price's legacy. Ria remembered a cold afternoon in his study. The wind was whipping off the inlet, rattling the windows. Price was writing at his desk, not on a computer, but in a thick leather-bound ledger. He'd looked up at her, a strange, sad foresight in his eyes. He was drafting what he called his memo on a principled air. He didn't name her. He simply wrote, should my capacity ever be questioned, the authority I vest in my chosen successor is based not on blood, nor on persuasion, but on a proven refusal to compromise for comfort. He'd tapped the page. She will know what this means. He had known this would come. He had been preparing the board. Price's last call, she later learned, had been to Judge Alaric Boone. They had clerked together in their youth. It was a short call, a dying man's final strategic move. Alaric, he had said, his voice weak but firm. There will be a fight when I'm gone. The vultures will circle when they do. Trust the one who stays quiet at the right time. Trust the one who doesn't need to speak. The day he died, the monitors in the sterile hospital room were the only sound. The Coincidental had sent a magnificent, towering bouquet of white lilies, the kind one sends to a funeral, 3 days before he passed. They were in the hallway. The scent was too strong. Ria was the one sitting by his bed. She held his thin, papery hand, the fight finally gone out of him. The promise she had made him to protect the fund, to protect his name, settled over her. It was not a chain, but a mantle, a gentle, terribly heavy burden. Now, in her rented office, 6 days into the 10-day deadline, she felt that weight. Rusk's move was smart. The dead doctor, the defunct hospital. It was sloppy, but it was designed to muddy the water, to buy him time to spin his media narrative. She needed something physical. On the 7th day, a plain brown envelope, stiff with cardboard, arrived at her office. No return address, just her name, printed by a label maker. Inside, there was no letter, just a single 4x6 high-resolution macro photograph. It was a close-up of the embossed seal on the fraudulent St. Aurelian certificate. Stuck to the back was a yellow sticky note with 3 words. Also printed, check the fiber. Ria pulled the original certificate from her briefcase and placed it under her desk lamp. She took out a handheld forensic loupe, a tool from her bureau go bag. She clicked on its high-intensity LED and magnified the seal. Rusk's forgery was good. The embossed letters were correct. But there, pressed deep into the paper fibers by the sheer force of the stamping die, was something the photographer had seen. It was a thread. A single microscopic strand of linen dyed a faint blue. Ria stopped breathing for a second. She knew exactly what it was. It was a ghost, the old manual. Cast iron embossing presses from the 1980s and 90s often used a linen-based guide in the die mechanism. Those machines had been discontinued for decades, replaced by modern automated presses that use nylon or plastic guides, if they use them at all. The batch of memorabilia Rusk's paralegal had purchased from the liquidation auction hadn't just included the seal's die, it had included the archaic, hand-operated press that went with it. Rusk hadn't just used a dead man's name. He had used a dead technology, and it had left a fingerprint. The linen fiber was a declaration of war. It was physical, tangible proof of an anachronism, and Ria knew exactly where to take it. High-end forensics was a private lab housed in a nondescript glass building, a place where corporations and the quietly powerful went when they needed the absolute, undeniable truth. It was run by a man named Dr. Aries Thorne, a specialist in historical document verification, who could tell you the year a piece of paper was milled, its content in its pulp. Ria bypassed the pristine lobby and took the elevator directly to his lab. She laid a high-quality copy of the certificate on his stainless steel work surface. "I need a full workup," she said without preamble. "Ink chromatography, paper analysis, and a microscopic verification of the seal impression. I suspect the ink is modern, and I know the press it was made on is not." She pointed to the magnified area where the linen fiber was embedded. "That's your starting point." Thorne, a man with the quiet intensity of a watchmaker, simply nodded, already adjusting the articulated arm of a digital microscope. He didn't ask about the case or her circumstances. The document was his client, and its story was all that mattered. While Thorne began his meticulous autopsy of the certificate, Ria re-engaged Mara Delaney. "The seal came from a bulk lot of memorabilia," Ria said over the phone, pacing the confines of her small office. "The LLC that bought it was a shell linked to Rusk's paralegal. I need the actual invoice, the seller, the liquidation company. They'll have a record, a line item. I need to know exactly what was in that lot. They won't just give it to me," Delaney's voice crackled. "I know," Ria replied. "Which is why I've just filed a motion for a subpoena duces tecum, naming the liquidation firm as a third-party record holder. But the court is slow. A friendly chat from you might get us a preview before the papers are served. See what you can find. 3 days later, Thorne's preliminary report landed in her inbox. It was a masterpiece of scientific certainty, stripped of all legal jargon. The ink from the seal, when subjected to gas chromatography, showed a chemical composition of a glycol-based solvent that did not exist before 2018. The paper's fiber matrix was consistent with modern acid-free archival stock, not the cotton rag blend St. Aurelian had used for its official documents. And then the kill shot. Microscopic analysis of the linen fiber revealed trace deposits of chalk powder. As Thorne's report dryly noted, this specific compound was used as an anti-moisture agent in the packaging of only one auction lot from the 2016 St. Aurelian liquidation. Lot 7B, described as vintage administrative office supplies, as is. Rusk hadn't just bought a seal, he'd bought a time capsule, and its dust was now all over his forgery. The same afternoon, Delaney delivered the second blow. She'd persuaded a clerk at the liquidation company to find the original sales manifest for Lot 7B. The invoice, paid by the shell company, listed the contents: 1 cast iron hand press, 33 retired hospital seals, embossing dies, miscellaneous stationery. It was signed for upon collection by a courier service, with the delivery address listed as a P.O. box. A P.O. box that Delaney, with a few more keystrokes, tied to none other than Gideon Rusk's personal secretary. Armed with Thorne's report and the invoice, Rhea's subpoena request to the court was no longer speculative. Judge Boone, seeing the direct chain of evidence, approved it immediately. The order was served. Gideon Rusk was to produce the original certificate, the hand press, and the seal for court inspection. The response from Rusk's team was telling: they didn't refuse. They stalled. A motion was filed requesting a 2-week extension, citing the difficulty of locating archived materials from a former associate. It was a lie, and Rhea knew it was a lie meant to buy time. Frustrated by the delay, but certain of her path, Rhea felt a pull toward the one place that still felt sane, Price's house at Mistral Inlet. She needed to walk through his library, to smell the scent of old paper and sea salt, to reconnect with the man, not the legal abstraction. She let herself in with the key he had given her years ago. The house was silent, a shrine to a life of quiet contemplation. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, slanting through the large bay window. She ran her fingers along the spines of his books: jurisprudence, philosophy, poetry. He had prepared her for a fight. She knew it. He had been a strategist to his very core. He would not have left her to face this with nothing. Her eyes scanned the built-in bookshelves, thousands of volumes forming a map of his mind. Then she saw it. Not a book out of place, but a flaw in the woodwork. On the vertical stile separating 2 sections of shelves near the floor, was a tiny, perfectly round hole, no bigger than a pinhead. It looked like a keyhole for a dollhouse. Kneeling, she pressed a straightened paper clip from her briefcase into the hole. There was a faint click. A section of the baseboard, seamlessly integrated into the design, swung open on a tiny hinge. Inside the dark cavity was a small, flat tin box, the kind that once held expensive cigars. Taped to the lid was a yellowed label in Price's elegant, spidery handwriting, clear and sharp: if they come. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet, were 2 items. The first was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax impression of the Price family crest. On the front, in the same black ink, were 2 initials, AKB. Alaric Boone. The second was a small, brushed metal USB drive. It had no markings, but a tiny slip of paper was tucked beside it. On it was a 24-character alphanumeric string, the encryption key. Back in her office, the city lights beginning to glitter outside, Rhea plugged the drive into her laptop. After entering the key, a single file appeared on the screen: Testament.mp4. She put on her headphones and clicked play. Malcolm Price appeared on the screen. He was not in a hospital bed. He was in his study at Mistral Inlet, the same bay window behind him, the late sun illuminating his face. He looked tired, thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were sharp, lucid, and filled with a fierce intelligence. He was speaking directly to the camera. "If you are watching this," he began, his voice steady, "it means that my character and my faculties are being called into question, likely by those who mistake bloodlines for virtue. So, let me be unequivocally clear." He leaned forward slightly. "I have established the Price Integrity Fund to foster a generation of lawyers who understand that the law must have a moral core. It is not a family slush fund. It is not a monument to my name. It is a tool." He paused, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "As for my choice of custodian, I did not choose a relative. I chose an heir to a principal. I chose Rhea Kincaid because on 3 separate occasions, she refused compensation for her work with me, insisting it was an education, not a job. I chose her because she has never once asked me for anything except a sharper argument. She is the embodiment of the integrity this fund is meant to promote. She is not my beneficiary. She is its guardian." He held up a copy of the day's newspaper, the date clearly visible. It was from 2 weeks before his death. "My mind is my own. My will is my own. And my legacy is in the hands of the one person I trust to protect it from the comfortable corrosion of greed." The video ended. Rhea sat in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating the silent tears on her face. He had armed her. The next morning, she filed the evidence, not publicly, but under seal, directly to Judge Boone's chambers. The tin box, the unopened letter addressed to him, and the USB drive were submitted with emotion. Her request was simple and strategic, that this evidence remain sealed and unseen by the opposition, to be opened by the judge only in the event that the plaintiffs, Charles and Evelyn Kincaid, formally submitted their certificate of diminished capacity as official evidence in the proceedings. It was a trap. She was daring Rusk to present his forgery, knowing she held the truth in reserve. The court filing, though sealed, sent ripples through the media. A clerk in the courthouse leaked the existence of a mystery box and a secret recording. The speculation was rampant. Rhea, as always, said nothing. The pressure, however, was cracking the plaintiffs' united front. Her mother called. "Rhea, Charles thinks we should go on." Evelyn's voice was thin and frayed. "But perhaps we could just settle this. A small portion of the fund for a family foundation. It would look good for everyone." "The fund isn't mine to negotiate with, Mother," Rhea said, her voice flat. "Your father is just concerned about appearances. He should have been concerned with them before he hired Gideon Rusk." The call ended, but it was a sign of fracture. Charles was pushing forward on ego. Evelyn was beginning to feel the icy chill of consequence. That evening, the final piece fell into place. Rusk, rattled by the rumors of a secret recording and the court order for his press, made his fatal mistake. He called Rhea's personal cell phone. Kincaid, his voice was a low, menacing purr. "A piece of friendly advice. These things can get ugly. Leaks happen. A video, for instance, taken out of context. It could be very damaging to a man's reputation. It could dissolve a fund into a cloud of scandal and legal fees before a single scholarship is ever awarded. Think about that." Rhea was silent, holding the phone to her ear. On her laptop, a small, legally compliant recording software icon blinked, silently capturing every word. "Is that a threat, Mr. Rusk?" she asked calmly. "It's an observation about the nature of public perception," he said smoothly and hung up. She saved the file. It was extortion veiled in legal ease, it was proof of intent. An hour later, An email arrived from Mara Delaney. The subject line was a single name, Dr. Julian Croft. The email read, Croft was Price's primary care physician for the last 5 years of his life. Retired to Vermont 6 months ago, hates the coincidental, says Price was as sharp as a shard of glass until the day he died, and is willing to sign a sworn affidavit to that effect. His number is attached. Go get him. Rhea looked at the pieces arrayed before her, the forensic report, the invoice, the video testament, the recorded threat, and now a living, credible witness. The 10-day deadline was up tomorrow. Rusk had built a house of cards. She was about to replace it with a fortress of fact. The preliminary hearing room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. It was a smaller, less formal venue than the main courtroom, but today it felt like the center of the universe for everyone present. Gideon Rusk stood before Judge Boone, radiating a confidence that was almost theatrical. He had weathered Rhea's initial procedural challenges, and was now ready to play his trump card. Your Honor, Rusk announced, his voice resonating with rehearsed solemnity. The plaintiffs submit what is perhaps the most difficult and painful piece of evidence in this entire proceeding, a certified medical assessment of Dean Malcolm Price's cognitive state, dated shortly before his passing. He slid the document across the table. It was the certificate of diminished capacity, the linchpin of his entire case. The Aurelian Hospital seal was prominent at the bottom, a mark of supposed unimpeachable authority. Judge Boone accepted it, his face a neutral mask. The reporters in the back scribbled furiously. Rusk was about to continue, but Rhea stood. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room's hushed energy. Your Honor, the defense has reason to believe this document is a fabrication. We request an immediate in-court examination by a certified forensic specialist who is present and waiting. A murmur went through the room. Rusk's confident smile tightened. Objection. This is a stalling tactic. The document is certified. An interesting choice of words, Rhea said, her eyes fixed on Boone. The certification itself is what we are questioning. Boone considered for a moment, his gaze shifting from the certificate in his hand to Rhea's unwavering stance. The court is interested in the truth above all else. Objection overruled. Call your specialist. Dr. Aries Thorne from High-End Forensics was sworn in. He moved with an unhurried precision, setting up a portable digital imaging station connected to the courtroom's large display screens. He placed the certificate under the lens. Dr. Thorne, Rhea began. Can you tell the court about the materials used to create this document? Of course, Thorne said, his voice calm and academic. He projected a magnified image of the seal's ink. First, the ink. Through gas chromatography, we identified its solvent as a glycol ether compound. This specific formula was not patented or commercially available until the third quarter of 2018. He paused. The certificate is dated October 2017. The ink it was stamped with did not yet exist. The room erupted in whispers. Rusk was on his feet. This is preposterous. Ink formulas are constantly changing. Silence, Mr. Rusk, Boone warned, his eyes narrowed, now intensely focused on the screen. Thorne continued, unfazed. Second, the paper stock. He changed the image to a microscopic view of the paper fibers. This is a modern acid-free archival paper, with a high wood pulp content. St. Aurelian Hospital, Asbrit's own archival records, which we consulted exclusively, used a 25% cotton fiber blend for all official medical certifications. This is not their paper. Finally, Thorne said, zooming in on the detail that had started it all, the impression of the seal itself. The image on the screen was a close-up of the tiny embedded blue thread. This is a linen fiber. It contains trace elements of chalk powder, an anti-moisture agent. Our research confirms this fiber, and these trace elements are consistent with an antiquated manual cast iron press that was sold as part of a single liquidation, Lot 7B from the St. Aurelian Asset Auction in 2016. Thorne looked away from the screen and directly at the judge. This document could not have been made in 2017. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. Every eye in the room was on Gideon Rusk. Judge Boone placed the certificate down on his bench, as if it were contaminated. He leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. Mr. Rusk, I am going to ask you a direct question. Where did you obtain this document? Rusk, for the first time, looked flustered. His practiced composure was gone, replaced by a pallid sheen of sweat on his forehead. Your Honor, it was provided to my firm from the archived files of a collaborating consultant who had previously worked with the Coincidental family. The lie was vague and clumsy, and everyone knew it. Provide the court with the name of this consultant, Boone commanded. I would have to check our records. Your Honor, Rhea stood again. Perhaps this might refresh his memory. She placed a small digital audio recorder on the table. Your Honor, this is a recording of a call I received from Mr. Rusk 2 nights ago. In it, he appears to threaten me with the public release of a damaging video in order to pressure me into dropping my defense of the Price Fund. Objection! Rusk shouted, his voice cracking. This is an illegal recording. It's inadmissible. Was it an interstate call, Mr. Rusk? Rhea asked coolly. Because our state is a one-party consent jurisdiction, I consented. Boone's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Mr. Rusk, your objection is noted and overruled. I will review this recording in my chambers. We are skating on the edge of some very serious ethical violations here. He looked from Rusk's panicked face to the evidence Rhea had submitted under seal days ago. Given the questions raised today about the plaintiff's evidence, I believe the time has come to unseal a submission from the defense. He signaled to his clerk, who brought him the tin box. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Boone took out the cream-colored envelope addressed to AKB. This letter, he announced, is from Dean Malcolm Price. The wax seal is unbroken. With a small knife, he carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He read it to himself first, his expression unreadable. Then he looked out over the courtroom, his eyes finally settling on Charles and Evelyn Coincidental. He read Price's words aloud, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. Alaric, he began, if the person bearing the name Rhea Coincidental appears before you in this matter, it is because she is the one I have chosen. I chose her for the simple reason that she has always refused personal gain when it was most convenient to accept it. Trust her integrity. It has been tested and proven where it counts, in private, when no one was watching. Malcolm Price. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Charles gripped his knees, his knuckles white, his face a mask of stone-cold fury. The cameras flashed, a frantic staccato burst of light capturing their raw, unguarded reactions. Rhea did not look at them. She kept her eyes on Judge Boone, her posture perfectly still, her breathing slow and measured, as if she were dissecting a complex legal text line by line. She was not a daughter in that moment. She was an officer of the court witnessing the execution of a dead man's final, brilliant strategy. Rusk, seeing his case disintegrate before his eyes, scrambled for purchase. Your Honor, this letter is a complete surprise. It's prejudicial. We have had no time to review it, to authenticate it. You had no trouble submitting your own unauthenticated document, Mr. Rusk, Boone countered, his tone glacial. However, in the interest of due process, I will grant you a continuance. He looked at the clock. You have 24 hours. As the hearing adjourned, Rhea's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mara Delaney. He knows his court. Rusk's secretary just initiated a full forensic wipe of her office hard drive. Too late. I already got a cloud backup of the liquidation company's invoice from their off-site server. It's on its way to you. Rhea walked out of the courtroom, ignoring the swarm of reporters. She had work to do. Within the hour, she had filed an emergency subpoena, not for the invoice she now possessed, but for the supplier's master inventory manifest. The invoice proved Rusk's firm had bought the lot containing the press. The manifest would prove something more. It would list the unique serial number of the antique cast iron press sold in Lot 7B. It was the final, unbreakable link in the chain of fraud, a number that would tie the lie on the paper directly to the man who had paid for the tools to create it. Rusk had 24 hours. It was 24 hours too few. The 24-hour reprieve was a gift, not to Rusk, but to Rhea. While Rusk and his team were frantically trying to find a legal shield against the forensic evidence, Rhea was sharpening a new sword. She wasn't just reviewing the certificate, she was reviewing every piece of paper Rusk had ever filed in his entire career that she could get her hands on. She had the fraudulent certificate, signed by the deceased Dr. Alistair Finch, spread out on her desk next to a dozen other documents, old motions, public filings, even a scanned copy of a letter he had written to the local bar association, retrieved by Delaney from a public archive. She was looking for a pattern, a psychological tick, anything. And then she saw it. It was the signature, not Rusk's, but the forged Dr. Finch. The name was looped in an elegant, slightly old-fashioned cursive. She focused on the letter G in Finch. It was distinctive, a rare double-looped G, where the lower loop closed by crossing back over the upper one. It was a flourish of arrogance. Her eyes darted to the other documents, the ones Rusk had personally signed. She found it on a motion from 2019. And again on the Bar Association letter, it was his G. In his haste to forge a signature, in his supreme confidence, Gideon Rusk had defaulted to his own muscle memory. He had signed the forgery, with a ghost of his own hand. She immediately sent high-resolution scans of all the documents to a new specialist, a court-certified handwriting analyst. The call came back 6 hours later. The analyst was giddy with professional excitement. "This is extraordinary," the woman said. "The baseline, the letter spacing, the pen pressure are all superficially different, a clear attempt at disguise. But the G formation, it's what we call a master pattern, a subconscious flourish as unique as a fingerprint." I ran the comparison analysis. The probability that the same person wrote the name Finch and the signature Gideon Rusk is in excess of 95%. Rhea now had him in a perfect pincer. One set of jaws was the physical forensic evidence of the seal, the ink, the paper, the linen fiber, proving the document was a recent fabrication. The second, sharper set of jaws was the handwriting analysis, proving he was the fabricator. This was no longer just about undue influence, it was about conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. She was simultaneously dismantling his case and building a new one against him. That night, as she was drafting the supplemental brief that would deliver this final blow, her cell phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number, parking garage. Level 3. Your mother. Rhea found Evelyn Kincaid huddled near a concrete pillar, far from the security cameras. She was not the polished, grieving philanthropist from the television. She was a terrified woman, the dove-grey suit was rumpled, her eyes red and puffy. "He's going to ruin us," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed Rhea's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Rhea, you have to stop. This has gone too far. I didn't know. I swear to you, I never knew anything about a fake seal or a dead doctor." Gideon said it was just a formality. Rhea looked at her mother's desperate face, a face she had spent a lifetime trying to earn approval from. She felt a familiar cold ache, but it was distant now, cauterized by the fight. "You didn't know about the seal," Rhea stated. It wasn't a question. But you knew about the fund. Did you know what it was for? It was Malcolm's money, his legacy, Evelyn stammered. Did you know? Ria pressed, her voice low and sharp. That the charter specifically earmarks it for needs-based scholarships for students from poor backgrounds. The kind of students who can't afford Lockmere, the kind of student I was before Price helped me. Evelyn's face crumpled. She had no answer. She just stood there clutching her pearls and began to cry, silent, terrible tears of self-pity. You weren't trying to protect a legacy, Mother, Ria said, gently removing her mother's hand from her arm. You were trying to steal from poor kids, so you could put the Coincidental name on a building. Go home. Stay away from Charles, and get a lawyer who isn't Gideon Rusk. Evelyn flinched as if struck. Ria turned and walked back to the elevator, the sound of her mother's quiet sobs swallowed by the concrete void. While Evelyn crumbled, Charles Coincidental doubled down. Deprived of the courtroom, he launched his final offensive in the press. He gave an interview to a sympathetic online news portal, his face a mask of righteous anger. My own daughter, he declared, a disloyal, ungrateful child, is desecrating the memory of a good man and destroying the Coincidental family heritage for her own selfish gain. This is a tragedy. Ria knew she couldn't fight him in the mud. So she fought him with the truth. That same afternoon, she finalized the first draft of the Price Integrity Fund's charter and application process. She sent the complete proposal package, detailing the scholarship criteria, the selection committee she was forming, and the first list of anonymous, needs-based applicants, to the admissions deans at 3 of the state's top law schools, including Lockmere. And she copied the press. The effect was instantaneous. The public narrative, so carefully crafted by Rusk, shattered. The question on news forums and social media was no longer, is she a predator? It was, if she's trying to embezzle the money, why is she publicly opening the scholarship applications? For the first time, the tide of opinion turned, and it turned decisively in her favor. The move infuriated the court. Judge Boone, seeing his case spiral into a public relations war, issued an immediate and severe gag order on all parties. No more interviews, no more press releases. His order read, this case will be tried on facts in my courtroom and nowhere else. He set the date for the final evidentiary hearing, 48 hours. The clock was ticking. Ria had the seal, the ink, the fiber, the invoice, the handwriting, the recorded threat, and the living witness. It was an avalanche of evidence. But she still felt Price's strategic mind at work, as if there was one last piece he had left for her. The piece arrived via a text message to Mara Delaney, who forwarded it to Ria. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear, Rusk's team is in chaos. They missed something. Find the merit ledger in the Mayflower Hall archives at Lockmere Law. Price was old school. He wrote everything down. Mayflower Hall was the semi-forgotten archive of the law school, a dusty, climate-controlled room in the library sub-basement. As the executor of Price's academic estate, Ria still had access. She found the ledger in a box marked Faculty Admin. It was a thick, bound book, the kind with marbled covers filled with Price's dense, meticulous script. It was a private log of his academic and mentoring activities. She flipped through the pages, a record of a life lived in service to the law, and then she found the entry. It was dated from 8 years prior. It was short, but it was the final, perfect capstone to her entire defense. It read, Ria Cade met Re, Ethical Modeling and Sovereign Debt, provided extensive analysis. This is the third time she has refused a consultation fee, stating the work is its own reward. She is the only one. Integrity confirmed. He hadn't just chosen her in his will. He had vetted her, tested her, and recorded the results for posterity. He had known, even then, that a man like him would have enemies, and that his chosen heir would need one final, quiet truth on her side. Judge Boone, in a move that signaled his utter loss of patience with the public spectacle, had ordered a mandatory settlement conference. It was a formal attempt at mediation held in a windowless room in the courthouse annex, stripped of all press, all stenographers, and all ceremony. It was just Rhea, her parents, and their respective counsels. Gideon Rusk was conspicuously absent, having sent a junior associate in his place, a young man who looked physically ill. For 5 minutes, the associate had read a dry, procedural offer, then silence. Charles Coincidental cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the small room. He straightened his tie. This is all, of course, a deeply regrettable family misunderstanding. Stop, Rhea said. Her voice was low, but it held absolute authority. The associate froze. Charles's eyes snapped to her. This is not a misunderstanding, Rhea continued, her gaze locked on her father. This isn't for the court record, and this isn't for the news. This is for me. I have one question for you, father. How many times in my life have you chosen money, or the appearance of it, over me? The air crackled. Evelyn, who had been staring at her hands, looked up, her eyes wide with panic. Charles's face, which had been set in a mask of patrician concern, hardened, the mask dissolved, revealing the cold, hard structure beneath. That is an impertinent and ungrateful question, he said, his voice dropping to the register he used for failed subordinates. This was never about money. This is about family honor, an honor you have systematically dismantled piece by piece ever since you decided to play at being a public servant instead of taking your place in a world that mattered. My world matters, Rhea said, her voice flat. My integrity matters. This fund matters. The Coincidental name matters more, Charles retorted, leaning forward, his voice rising. Price was our friend. His legacy belongs with us, his peers. Not with an ungrateful girl who manipulated him in his dotage. His entire estate is a monument to our social circle. You have stolen that. You have embarrassed us. That is what I'm here to fix. The family honor must be restored. Honor, Rhea repeated the word, tasting it. You believe honor is a plaque on a wall. You believe it's a name in a gala program. You've spent your entire life confusing your net worth with your self-worth, and you've demanded everyone around you do the same. This isn't about restoring honor. This is about you being publicly denied something you felt entitled to. She turned her gaze to her mother. Evelyn flinched. And you, Rhea said. You let this happen. You sat on television and you cried for him. I didn't know. Evelyn's voice was a bare whisper. The performance was gone. This was the raw, hollow terror of a woman who had backed the wrong horse, and was only now realizing the cost. Gideon Rusk, he just gave me papers. He said it was to protect Malcolm's wishes. He said you were confused. I just signed them. I didn't even read them. It was the confession, the admission of willful blindness, the cardinal sin of the Coincidental family. It was easier to sign the lie than to question the man who promised a comfortable outcome. You didn't read them, Rhea stated, a cold clarity settling over her. You didn't read them because you didn't want to know. You wanted the fund, and you were happy to let Rusk and father do whatever it took to get it. While you practiced looking sad for the cameras, you signed a fraudulent medical document that accused a brilliant man of being incompetent. You signed a lie that labeled your own daughter a predator. You just didn't want to get your hands dirty with the ink. Evelyn's face crumpled. A painful, dry sob escaped her. What? What do you want? She whispered. Rhea looked at them both, the architect of the lie and his willing, silent partner. This was the true face of her family, the veneer stripped away not by anger, but by simple, stark facts. I am offering you one path out of this, Rhea said, her voice devoid of triumph, holding only the weight of a final judgment. You will file a motion to withdraw your petition, effective immediately. You will state that you have reviewed new evidence and are satisfied that Dean Price was of sound mind, and you will issue a public apology, not to me, but to the memory of Malcolm Price and to Lockmere Law. You will state that the fund will proceed exactly as he designed it. She paused, delivering the final, non-negotiable term. And the fund will bear his name, Price, and his name alone. The Coincidental Family Trust will be dissolved before it is even formed. You get nothing. You walk away with your name cleared of the fraud Rusk committed in your service. Charles Coincidental stared at her. His face was pale. The demand for a public apology, a public withdrawal, and most of all, the erasure of the Coincidental name was a public execution of his ego. He let out a short, sharp laugh. You disgraced yourself when you hired Gideon Rusk, Rhea replied. Charles pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the floor. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked down at his wife. Evelyn was looking at him, her hand half extended, her eyes pleading. Charles did not look at her. He looked only at Rhea, his eyes filled with a cold, pure hatred that was almost clarifying. You are no longer my daughter, he said. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door open. He left his lawyer and he left his wife. Evelyn Coincidental sat alone at the table, her body shaking, holding a drenched linen handkerchief to her face. The mediation was over. As Rhea packed her briefcase, her phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. It's done. Secretary's immunity deal is signed. She gave the DA's office the backup drive from her home machine. Another text came through a second later. Got a copy. You are not going to believe this. An email followed. It contained a series of scanned documents and Word files, all from a folder labeled PRJ Restoration Coincidental. Rhea opened the first file. It was a formal memo written by Gideon Rusk himself, dated the week after Price's funeral. Subject, Narrative Strategy. Archive the daughter. Our primary obstacle is her reputation at the Bureau. We cannot attack her professionally. We must attack her personally. Phase 1. Frame her as the cold daughter, isolated and career-driven. Contrast with the warm, grieving friends, the Coincidental. Phase 2. Introduce themes of undue influence and elder isolation. Use surrogates in the local press to seed the narrative. Phase 3. Post-filing, leak the medical certificate. This will force her to settle to protect her own professional standing from the scandal. It was all there, a cold-blooded, premeditated strategy to use lies and media manipulation to extort a settlement. He had never intended to win in court. He had intended to win in the press by destroying her reputation. Rhea forwarded the entire package to Judge Boone's chambers with a single line, submitted under seal, this was the purpose of the forgery. Boone's response was immediate. An order was issued to all parties within the hour. Final arguments and presentation of all evidence will be heard tomorrow at 10 a.m. No further motions, no delays. The judge was done. He had seen the conspiracy, and he was ready to end it. Rhea knew Rusk was finished. She knew her parents' case was dead. But the gag order was still in effect, and the public narrative was still a confused mess of Rusk's creation. Price had taught her that the truth didn't need a loudspeaker, but it did need to be spoken. She was going to violate the gag order. It was a calculated risk. She typed a short, formal statement. She didn't send it to the local news anchors who had parroted Rusk's lies. She sent it to the State Bar Association's journal, the Lockmere Law Alumni Newsletter, and a dozen legal ethics professors. It read, the Price Integrity Scholarship Fund will begin accepting applications on November 1st. All selection and distribution processes will be overseen by an independent public board. We invite and welcome public oversight. As her statement began to circulate in the quiet, serious channels she had chosen, a new story dropped. This one from an independent investigative journalist who had been digging into Rusk ever since the high-profile case began. The headline was stark: Gideon Rusk, Coincidental family lawyer, previously censured for undisclosed lobbying. The article detailed a past scandal where Rusk had been formally disciplined by the bar for using a community action group as a front for a corporate real estate client, a pattern of using deceptive means to achieve a wealthy client's ends. It wasn't petty gossip. It wasn't salacious. It was just the facts, arriving at the perfect time. It was the stark, undeniable truth of what ambitious men will do for money, laid bare for the world to see. The final hearing convened in an atmosphere of electric tension. The gallery was overflowing, a mix of journalists, legal students, and the city's elite, all drawn by the scent of a spectacular implosion. Gideon Rusk was present, his face a pale, tight mask of defiance. Charles Coincidental sat beside him, rigid as a statue. Evelyn was not there. Rhea did not begin with an opening statement. She began with evidence. She moved with a cold, efficient grace. Each document submitted was a deliberate strategic move in a game of Go. Each piece of paper a stone placed to surround and capture her opponent. First, she submitted the certified report from the handwriting analyst. The document was projected onto the courtroom screens. The analyst's conclusion was stark and stripped of jargon. The unique double-looped G formation present in the forged signature of Dr. Alistair Finch exhibits over 20 points of individual characteristic similarity to the known exemplars of Mr. Gideon Rusk's signature. The probability of another writer producing this specific combination of characteristics is statistically negligible. It is my expert opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that Gideon Rusk forged the signature on the medical certificate. A collective intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Rusk did not flinch, but a vein pulsed in his temple. Furthermore, Rhea continued, her voice even and dispassionate. The defense submits the following supporting exhibits. She placed them on the clerk's desk, one after another. Exhibit A, the sales invoice from the liquidation company, showing the purchase of Lot 7B, vintage administrative supplies, by a shell corporation linked directly to Mr. Rusk's secretary. Exhibit B, the master inventory manifest from the supplier for Lot 7B, showing the unique serial number of the cast iron handpress included in that sale, a serial number that matches the forensic analysis of the tool used to make the impression on the fraudulent certificate. Exhibit C, the sign-out receipt from the Mayflower Hall archives at Lockmere Law showing that Dean Price's private merit ledger was accessed by the defense with permission from the academic estate. And finally, Exhibit D, she said, placing the heavy, leather-bound ledger itself on the desk. The merit ledger. I direct the court's attention to the entry on page 247, dated 8 years prior. The page was displayed on the screen. Price's elegant handwriting, clear for all to see, Rhea Coincidental. This is the third time she has refused a consultation fee. She is the only one. Integrity confirmed. Rusk's junior associate was visibly sweating. Charles Coincidental stared at the floor, his face ashen. The evidence was not just a chain, it was a cage, and its bars were cold, hard, documented facts. Rhea then turned to the human element. Your Honor, the defense calls its sole witness, Dr. Julian Croft. Dr. Croft, a silver-haired man with a kind but weary face, took the stand. Dr. Croft, Rhea asked, in your professional medical opinion, what was the state of Dean Price's cognitive health in his final months? He was dying, Dr. Croft said, his voice clear. His body was failing him, but his mind was a fortress. He was as sharp, lucid, and legally competent as any person I have ever treated. The man could still quote case law from memory better than I could remember my patient's charts. The idea that he suffered from diminished capacity is not just a medical falsehood, it is a profound insult to his memory. With that, Rhea was done with her witness. The foundation was laid, the forgery proven, the forger identified, and the victim's true state of mind established by his own doctor. Now it was time for the victim to speak for himself. Your Honor, Rhea said, addressing Judge Boone. The defense now requests to unseal and play the final piece of evidence submitted from the estate of Malcolm Price. Boone nodded to the clerk. The tin box was brought forward. The USB drive was inserted into the court system. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. The screen flickered to life, showing Malcolm Price in his study, the afternoon sun warming the room. He looked directly into the camera, into the courtroom, into the future he had so clearly anticipated. His voice, steady and resonant, filled the silent room. If you are watching this, he began, it means that my character and my faculties are being called into question. Let me be unequivocally clear. I have established the Price Integrity Fund. It is not a family slush fund. It is not a monument to my name. It is a tool. The camera held on his face, his eyes burning with conviction. As for my choice of custodian, I did not choose a relative. I chose an heir to a principal. I chose Rhea Kincaid because she has never once asked me for anything. I left it to her because she never asked for it. He leaned forward, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. It was a smile of deep, abiding affection and trust. She is the guardian. My legacy is in her hands. He started to say her name again. Rhea. Stop the video, Judge Boone commanded, his voice sharp. The image froze on Price's smiling face. The sound cut off. Boone had seen all he needed to see. The emotional impact was perfectly preserved, a final, powerful testament sealed by judicial command. Rusk lurched to his feet, his composure finally shattering. Objection, Your Honor. This is nothing more than personal sentiment. It's an old man's emotional ramblings. It has no bearing on the legal questions of capacity. Rhea turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The law, Mr. Rusk, she said, her voice dropping to an icy calm, makes a clear distinction between sentiment and the legal capacity to execute a will. Dr. Croft and Dean Price himself have just proven the latter. You, with your forged documents and manufactured narrative, have proven only the former. She turned back to Judge Boone. Your Honor, based on the overwhelming forensic and testimonial evidence presented, the defense requests that the court issue immediate and severe sanctions against the plaintiff's counsel, Mr. Gideon Rusk, for the willful submission of fraudulent medical documents and a clear conspiracy to commit perjury before this court. Boone made a note. The court takes your request under advisement, he said, his gaze lingering on Rusk with undisguised contempt. A ruling on sanctions will be delivered with my final verdict. Across the room, Evelyn Kincaid, who had slipped into the back of the gallery unnoticed, met her daughter's eyes for the first time in Rhea's memory. Her mother did not look away in disapproval or disappointment. She simply looked at her, a strange, unreadable expression of awe and terror on her face. Charles did not look up. He stared intently at the polished wooden floor, as if he could will it to open up and swallow him whole. That afternoon, as the city's legal community buzzed with news of the hearing's dramatic events, the independent journalist's follow-up story was published online. It was a cool, technical analysis of the St. Aurelian seal, complete with diagrams, expert quotes on antique presses, and a sidebar on the chemical composition of modern ink. It systematically, clinically, and publicly proved what Rhea had just proven in court. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and it was unanimous. Later that evening, a single plain envelope was slipped under Ria's office door. There was no return address. Inside, a single sheet of cheap paper was folded. On it were 4 words, typed in the same font as the anonymous tip about the linen fiber, "Don't forgive. They'll be back." Ria read the note, her expression unchanged. She folded it precisely in half and slipped it into the coincidental case file. It was just one more document. The battle was over. The war, she knew, was a different matter entirely, but she would file that away for another day. The courtroom was not chaotic. It was the opposite. The silence was a heavy, pressurized thing, the kind of quiet that precedes a violent weather break. Even the journalists in the gallery had stopped moving. Their pens poised, their cameras lowered. They understood that the flurry of evidence was over. The execution was about to begin. Judge Boone looked down at both tables, his face etched with a profound judicial weariness. "Mr. Rusk, Ms. Coincidental," he said, "we have heard the evidence. I will now hear your final arguments." Gideon Rusk stood. The swagger was gone. The expensive suit seemed to hang off him. He was a man stripped of his armor, left with only the script he had written from the beginning. He turned, not to the judge, but to the gallery, to the cameras he had courted for so long. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low, infused with a synthetic sorrow, "what we have witnessed here is a tragedy. We have seen a family, a good family, a cornerstone of the Harborview community, torn apart." He gestured toward Charles Coincidental, who looked like a man carved from ice. "We have seen a father's love, a mother's grief, twisted and portrayed as greed. We have seen a daughter blinded by ambition, willing to destroy her own parents, to disgrace their name, all for a fund she believes is hers." He was painting the narrative his PR memo had outlined. This is not about fraud. This is not about ink. This is about a family's broken heart. We ask the court to see the human cost, to heal this family, not to shatter it further. We ask for reconciliation. Ria stood as he Saturday. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at her parents. She looked directly at Judge Alaric Boone, the man who had shared a mentor with her. Her voice was low, steady, and had the carrying power of a steel cable. "Mr. Rusk is correct about one thing," she began, her quiet words silencing the rustle of Rusk's performance. "This is a story, but he has told the wrong one. The story in this courtroom is not about a broken heart. It is about a broken seal. It is about ink that did not exist. It is about a signature forged from a dead man's name. And it is about the students, the ones Mr. Rusk never mentioned, who will read their names on a scholarship list. If this court protects the truth," she clicked a remote. The large courtroom screen lit up, not with an emotional plea, but with a stark black and white timeline. "The evidence has already told the real story. Let us review it." Stripped of adjectives, the timeline was brutal in its simplicity. August, Dr. Alastair Finch dies. 2017 March, St. Aurelian Hospital is officially dissolved. Exhibit G. 2017 October, corporate filing. The date on the fraudulent certificate of diminished capacity, 2018 July. The ink used in the seal is commercially patented. Exhibit C, High-End Report. 2023 June, Lot 7B containing the antique press and seal is purchased by a Shell Corporation. Exhibit A, Invoice. 2023 July. Shell Corp ownership traced to Mr. Rusk's secretary. Exhibit B, Deposition. 2023. September, Mr. Rusk files this petition, supported by the certificate dated 6 years prior. Ria let the timeline hang in the air. "These are the facts," she said, her voice dropping. "They are not emotional. They are sequential. They are absolute, and they are immutable." She clicked the screen off. The room was dark again. Mr. Rusk's narrative of good intentions and family sorrow is suffocated by this timeline. There is no room for a misunderstanding when the forgery is this deliberate, this documented, and this clumsy. The plaintiff's entire case was built on a lie. A lie purchased from a liquidator and stamped in modern ink. She paused, and for the first time, she allowed her gaze to drift to the plaintiff's table. Charles would not meet her eye. Mr. Rusk spoke of my family, her voice did not waver. They are still my parents. That is a fact of biology. But the truth is not a family asset. It is not a commodity to be traded for reputation. It is not something the Coincidental name can buy, sell, or bury. It simply is. And the truth here is that a crime was committed in their name, in this court, to steal a fund intended for others. She turned back to Boone. Your Honor, Boone, who had been listening with his chin resting on his steepled fingers, spoke. Ms. Coincidental, what is your final request of this court? First, Rhea said, her voice like a hammer striking an anvil, that the court protect the absolute integrity of the Price Integrity Fund, affirm my position as its sole academic custodian, and dismiss the plaintiff's petition with extreme prejudice. Second, she continued, that the court sanction Gideon Rusk to the fullest extent of the law for committing a deliberate and documented fraud upon this court, and that his conduct be referred to the State Bar for disbarment proceedings. And third, she concluded, that the court order the scholarship selection and distribution process to be made fully transparent and public, subject to an independent annual audit, so that there's never again a shadow of doubt cast upon the legacy of Malcolm Price. The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken by a single tearing sound. Evelyn Coincidental, who had returned to sit in the front row of the gallery, let out a choked sob. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words audible in the vacuum. Rhea, my mother is so sorry. Charles Coincidental spun around in his seat, his face a grotesque mask of fury. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He turned his back to his wife, staring at the wall, his whole body rigid. Gideon Rusk, seeing the abyss open before him, stood up, his voice cracking. Your Honor, in light of the emotional nature of these proceedings, the plaintiffs wish to withdraw the medical certificate from evidence. Judge Boone looked at him, his eyes devoid of any pity. It is too late for that, Mr. Rusk. The document is not just evidence in this hearing. It is now evidence in a future one. Your attempt to withdraw a document you have been proven to have forged is noted as a profound admission of guilt. Rusk sat down. He didn't just sit, he collapsed into his chair, a man hollowed out. The courtroom held its breath. The storm had arrived. The cameras were motionless. Their red recording lights, like predator eyes in the dark. No one wanted to interrupt the perfect, terrible silence of the verdict that was clearly already written on Judge Boone's face. In the second row, Mara Delaney, who had been watching the entire exchange without expression, caught Rhea's eye. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. All the pieces were on the board. The game was over. Judge Boone did not need to consult his notes. He did not need to pause for dramatic effect. He had seen the evidence. He had heard the arguments, and he had made his decision. He looked out over the courtroom, his gaze sweeping over the plaintiff's table. And when he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried the immense, unimpeachable weight of the law. This court has been presented with two competing narratives, he began, his voice cutting through the silence. One of a heartbroken family seeking to protect a beloved friend's legacy. The other of a calculated criminal conspiracy to defraud this court and steal a charitable fund. After a thorough review of the evidence, this court finds that the facts support only the latter. He picked up the fraudulent certificate, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a piece of trash. This document, the so-called certificate of diminished capacity, is a forgery. The forensic evidence is not just compelling, it is absolute. The ink is anachronistic. The paper is incorrect. The seal was made with a retired press, and the signature was forged by the plaintiff's own counsel, Mr. Gideon Rusk. He let the paper drop to his desk. The presentation of this document was not a mistake. It was the central pillar of a deliberate, premeditated scheme to submit false evidence, to commit perjury, and to mislead this court in the service of greed. This was an attack on the very integrity of the judicial process. He looked directly at Rhea, and for the first time, a glimmer of the man who had clerked with Price showed through the judicial mask. Accordingly, the court finds the last will and testament of Dean Malcolm Price to be valid in its entirety. The Price Integrity Fund is a legitimate and legally protected entity. The court affirms, with immediate effect, the appointment of Ms. Rhea Kincaid as its sole and rightful academic custodian, with all the rights and responsibilities that title entails. The plaintiff's petition is dismissed with the highest possible prejudice. The verdict landed like a series of sonic booms, but Boone was not finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice hardening, this court does not sit idly by when it is the target of a crime. A complete copy of the evidence of this forgery, including the handwriting analysis, the forensic reports, and the recorded evidence of witness tampering and extortion by Mr. Rusk, will be transferred to the District Attorney's Office with a judicial recommendation for immediate criminal investigation. He then turned his gaze upon Charles Kincaid. Sanctions of the most severe nature will be levied against the plaintiffs, Charles and Evelyn Kincaid, for their role in financing and advancing this fraudulent claim. The same sanctions will be applied to Mr. Gideon Rusk and his firm. You sought to use this court as a tool for theft. You will now discover its power as an instrument of consequence. Finally, he addressed Rhea's last request, to eliminate any doubt and to honor the stated purpose of the fund. The court so orders that the complete charter and all criteria for the Price Integrity Scholarship be made public record. The court invites a consortium of local bar associations and academic institutions to form an independent oversight committee, ensuring that this fund operates with the transparency and integrity its founder intended. He struck the gavel once. The sound was like a gunshot. The case was over. The room exploded. Reporters scrambled from their seats, shouting questions. Charles Kincaid shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. A strangled cry of protest forming on his lips. This is an outrage. I will not. He stopped. Judge Boone had not raised his voice. He had not even moved. He had simply raised his head and fixed Charles with a look of such cold, absolute authority that Charles's words died in his throat. The fury on his face collapsed into a mask of slack-jawed shock. He sank back into his chair, a man utterly and completely defeated, not by a shout, but by a silent judicial glare. The press swarmed Rhea as she packed her briefcase. Ms. Kincaid, how does it feel? What do you have to say to your father? A comment for the people of Harborview. Rhea closed her briefcase, the latches clicking shut with an air of finality. She looked up, not at any single reporter, but at the chaotic scrum. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. Integrity doesn't need a megaphone, she said. It needs a process. That was all. She turned to leave. A hand touched her arm. It was Evelyn. Her face was a ruin of tears and shame. She had pushed through the crowd. Her eyes fixed on her daughter. Rhea, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a plea, a question, a lifetime of regret packed into a single word. Rhea looked at her mother. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no victory. There was only a great, sad distance. You know the way home, mother, she said, her voice soft but impossibly firm. She did not say our home. She did not say my home. She just stated a fact. Evelyn's hand dropped from her arm, as if it had been burned. Rhea turned her back and walked toward the courtroom doors. As she did, she saw a flash of movement at the plaintiff's table. Two uniformed court officers were approaching Gideon Rusk, who was staring into space, his face the color of ash. One of the officers spoke to him in a low voice. Rusk looked up, his eyes glassy with disbelief. He looked like a man who had been running at full speed and had just hit a wall of invisible glass. He stood up slowly, unsteadily. As the officers flanked him, the photographers, sensing the kill, turned as one, their lenses focusing, their flashes firing in a blinding, merciless volley, capturing the precise moment a brilliant career ended in disgrace. Rhea didn't watch. She had reached the great oak doors of the courtroom before pushing them open. She paused. She reached into her briefcase and took out the last item Price had left for her. It was not the letter for Boone, nor the USB drive. It was another, smaller envelope, one she had kept for herself. She opened it. There was no letter, just a small, thick card, like a business card, engraved with two words in Price's familiar script, integrity, always. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Rhea Kincaid's lips. It was not a smile of triumph or of joy. It was a smile of recognition, of a promise kept, of a final, quiet conversation with her mentor. She slipped the card back into her pocket. A permanent, private verdict. Then she pushed the doors open. The light of a bright, clear morning flooded the dim courtroom, silhouetting her for a moment in the doorway. It was the sharp, clean light of a new day. She stepped across the threshold, her shadow stretching long behind her on the marble floor. She walked into the light, leaving the noise, the lies, and the wreckage of her family behind her. She did not look back. She didn't need to. The truth was standing guard.